Hello and welcome. It's 11 o'clock in the morning. It's the first day of February 2022. It's 56 degrees and sunny here in Ventura, California, with a weird haze hanging over the city. And something's in the air because my allergies are reacting. Of course, when are they not? And it's February, which means we're going to be reviewing games I absolutely love. Now, there's no rhyme or reason for these games or what the order is that I've picked them, and some of my explanations will be more opinion and emotion based as opposed to like fact based. So it's going to be an unusual review, and obviously by the picture we're starting with Tales from the Loop by Free League Publishing, based upon the art of a guy whose name I cannot pronounce, so I'm not even going to try, but it's Sven Stalgen. Yeah, you know who it is. The artwork book that became the role-playing game, that became the Amazon series, that became the basics for the Free League Publishing storyline, with using the Mutant Year Zero engine. If you believe the hints that Free League Publishing has give, they are actually establishing a storyline where it's Tales from the Loop leads to Things from the Flood, leads to whatever the third one's going to be if they do the third book. I think it's called The Labyrinth, and then that leads to Twilight 2000, which leads to Mutant Year Zero, is the story arc, which eventually I think leads to Coriolis. We're not including the IP games like Aliens or a Blade Runner in there because they take place in separate IP-specific universes, and we're not, of course, including like Forbidden Lands or any of the fantasy stuff, though perhaps Vaesen is the past of the Free League Publishing universe, and then Twilight 2000 is the present, and Mutant Year Zero and Coriolis is the future. Anyways, Tales from the Loop, of course, is the role-playing game of the 80s that never wore, based upon the childhood of the artist. And the picture I chose that you see is the very first picture I ever saw of Tales from the Loop. I had heard of it, but I really didn't know what it is. I knew it had won Game of the Year. So the very first search I did for Tales from the Loop was this picture, the Tyrannosaurus Rexes attacking the milk truck. And this reminded me a lot of the TV show Primeval, which I really loved and always thought would be a good setting for a tabletop role-playing game. And as I looked more and more at the art, before I even knew anything about the story of the game, I just fell in love with this world. The strange combination of, the surreal, deep, beautiful, but silent and almost sort of sad and lonely landscape that is, the snow-covered Sweden, Europe that was his childhood in the 80s. Combine that with the imagery of just, the telephone poles and the factories spewing out the smoke, and just the industrialization of that pastoral forest as the technology of the 80s and just that cultural phenomenon hit those small little villages, and how it was different from us in the United States. But, if you live in, just sort of that world, and then add that to sort of the fantastic imagination of a kid growing up in the 80s, that last perfect summer of childhood before everything just sort of melts away and you're thrust into the expectations of teenage and adulthood, and just those adventures that you would have in a small town, whether that small town be somewhere in Europe or somewhere in Arizona, or just that last perfect summer, that last perfect Christmas vacation. All those adventures, and those adventures are dinosaurs and giant robots and mysterious conspiracies, and just this desire to hold on to those last few minutes of childhood before the 80s come in and sort of, crush it with the Cold War and the sudden influx of technology and the sudden just you wake up. I mean, grow up. The 50s are over. The pastoral disco last sort of Americana that was the 60s and the 70s is over. This is the 80s, and this is cyberpunk, and this is just sort of a sudden, influx of information and media, and the world is changing so quickly. Small little towns in the middle of, Dakota or Arizona are being swallowed up by corporations and businesses, and, your beautiful forest or your beautiful pastoral desert now has strange military complexes and weird looking architecture and giant things spewing, with smoke and jets going across the sky, and weird images are being broadcast 24/7 from MTV, and just the world of that perfect childhood of the late, of the 60s and the 70s is falling away, and even in the early 80s. And I think that's what the art captures, and that's what the game captured for me. And it's really hard to put it into words. When people ask me to describe Tales from the Loop, usually what I say is beautiful melancholy. And imagine role-playing a game in that last perfect summer Christmas break of childhood, where it's your last chance to explore your small town, and all the little small town things are going on, but there's also dinosaurs and robots. And just that longing for that nostalgia, that beautiful melancholy, that epic, silent, amazing yet tragic and beautiful, countryside and pastoral landscape that is, whether you're looking out your window in Sweden or Germany or Dakota or Arizona or Northern California, and the invasion of technology. So that's how I describe it. So what are the goods, the bads, the ugly of the actual Tales from the Loop system? Well, the ugly, if there is any, is definitely not for everybody. I mean, even if you are a fan of Stranger Things and want to play Stranger Things, it's definitely not Stranger Things. It's way more Erie, Indiana, but not even that. The closest representation I think would be the Primeval TV show, or Nancy Drew, the Hardy Boys, maybe a little bit of the supernatural aspects, or just the weird technology aspects, or just that that government X-Files conspiracy aspect. But yeah, it's kids on bikes in small towns investigating mysteries because the adults either can't or won't see it, or just are too busy being adults to pay attention. A lot of people have issues with the archetypes, and just the idea of playing kids in the 80s doesn't appeal to a lot of people. So despite the fact it won Tabletop Role-Playing Game of the Year and won multiple awards and got Free League Publishing on the map and is just considered such an amazing work of art, there are definitely people who have issues with it. They think the book is too big. It's very expensive. Free League Publishing stuff is constantly out of print. If you don't get it right away, it might be a long time before you can get it. Or best you can do is maybe a PDF. They're very expensive. You are mostly paying for the artwork and the world building. I mean, the book is at least 200, 300 pages. Most of that is art and world. But when you get to the actual, year zero mechanics and take away all the fluff, it's maybe 15 pages. So it's a big, crunchy fluff, lots of world building, lots of trying to establish that emotion. The art, of course, and that goes into why it was so expensive. And of course, Free League Publishing is notorious for having stuff out of print, so it's very hard to find it. I'm very lucky to have my copy. But if I wanted to go and buy another one now, it'd be, I think, almost impossible or extremely expensive. Yes, I mean, 50, 60, 70, mine was like $56, and that's a lot for a book of a game that I rarely, if ever, am ever going to play, because there's not really an audience, at least where I live. So that's the ugly. The bad is probably that you need the props. Free League Publishing games are notorious for their weird dice, even though they're just D6. And the cards. They have prop cards. They have cards that interlock with the system. And you can run the system without the cards, but it's really built to have those cards and have those initiative cards, have those plot cards, have those prop cards. And the cards, that's like 50, 60, 70 cards for some of the games. I mean, it's the equivalent of a Magic deck if you have all of them. And yeah, if you don't have them, and the dice, because it's a multiple D6 dice pool system, and it works on an idea of this plus this plus this, you need a lot of six-sided dice. And you need a lot of six-sided dice that have different colors to tell the difference between this roll and then what you're adding and then what you're adding. So you have like, your stat roll, your skill roll, and then if you have a gadget, that's going to add to the rolls. And again, some people have trouble with the archetypes and just, role-playing a kid in the 80s when you're 55 years old and you're already jaded. That's tough for a lot of people. A lot of people don't want to play a high school kid in the 80s, even despite the 80s nostalgia boom, which, let's face it, the 80s nostalgia boom is kind of over. But it's very difficult to find people who want to play it. In fact, since I found out about the game and purchased it, I've played one game of Tales from the Loop. I tried to run it, but there was no interest. And, I tried advertising it multiple different ways to try and get interest, but it's a very hard genre for people because for a lot of us, for all the good memories that we have of the 80s, there's a lot of bad memories too. I mean, the 80s were not perfect. They were a really ugly decade as well as a really amazing decade that's really you can't really repeat the 80s. I know there's a lot of 80s nostalgia, but if you didn't live through it, you can't really understand it. I mean, it was definitely a defining moment in history, especially in the United States, especially if you lived in California or in other big cities, or just, because so much changed. But it was also a very miserable 80s, especially if you were a kid like me going through the public high school system in the 80s, and just how ugly the high school system was back then, and just, bullying and just being an outsider and just so many things. I mean, as Dave and, as Jay and Silent Bob says, all those amazing movies with all those hot chicks and cool dudes that took place in Shermer, Illinois. But it turns out there is no Shermer, Illinois. And I think that's the best way to describe that 80s nostalgia. And if you live through it, as opposed to if you're just, hanging on to it. And for a lot of people, that's an uncomfortable period in their life. And for a lot of people, they don't want to relive it. And for a lot of people, are just like, I don't want to play kids who don't have guns and have to, solve mysteries. So that's probably the bad. Now the good. The system is archetype based, which some people like, some people don't, but it's very easy to play. It's very easy to run. It's just a dice pool system. You have stats, you have skills, and you have devices. And of course, then your character has plot points, bonds and flaws and things that they feel strongly about, and things that they, feel negatively about, typical kid things, typical things you would see in more of a storytelling style game that would make up the mindset of the character, what they feel about the other characters, what they're strongly passionate about, what they hate. But then the mutant in your system is just six-siders, six-siders, six-siders. You have a stat. That stat is designated by a number of six-siders, 1 through, I think, 4. Every 6 is a success. You need a certain amount of successes to do something. Bend down and tie your shoes. That's 1 success. You're going to roll 4d6. If you get 1 6, you've done it. Climb a wall. Well, that's 2 successes. So you're going to roll 4d6s, and if you get 2 6s, you climb the wall. It's cascading, increasingly difficult levels of the 6-siders you need to run. Now you can add a skill to that stat, and that skill is also rated from 1 to, I think, 4. And that's an additional number of 6-siders you can add to the roll, which is why you need the different colors. 1 color for stat, one color for skill. So now you're rolling 3 dice for your stat, 3 dice for your skill, 6 dice looking for all those 6s. And every 6 is a success, and every success equals to the table, like 1 success, 2 success, 3 success, 4 successes. So this is a 6th success. Now, if you have an item, that adds an additional number of D6. So you would have your 3D6 stat, 1 set of dice. Your 3D6 skill, a different set of dice. And then your item, which adds more D6s. Like, I have a screwdriver that lets me do things and adds an extra D6 to my tinker roll. So now I'm rolling 3D6, 3D6, 1D6, looking for all those successes. The system is very simple, but you need a lot of D6s. And unlike the West End Games D6 system, which has the explodey dice, this is just number of successes. Nothing adds to those successes. Nothing subtracts from those successes. You're just rolling, and then you have a number of successes you need to accomplish it. All the characters fit into very well-established archetype tropes. The jock, the popular girl, the nerd, the gamer, the goth chick, the outsider, the princess, the jock, the crazy girl, think the Breakfast Club. So, yeah. And so it's just a very simple, typical D6 role-playing game. There's no death in the game. You can reach the point where basically your character doesn't want an adventure anymore because of just the amount of physical, mental tragedies they've seen, or they grow up. The big thing about the game is Tales from the Loop embraces a certain age period. And when you grow up, you move on to Things from the Flood. That's the game that deals with the teenagers and the late adolescence characters, while Tales from the Loop is basically, elementary kids, early high school kids, and those uncomfortable puberty adolescent years. Again, that last perfect summer of childhood before you have to embrace the high school and the, beginning of college, which is the second game. And I guess there's a third game coming out or already out, which of course is the college years and after that. And then of course it goes Vaesen, I guess, maybe, or Symbonian, the other fantasy game, maybe. I don't think, we wouldn't count Forbidden Lands. Viking horror role-playing, that could lead to Tales from the Loop, which leads to Things from the Flood, which leads to the other one, which I think is called Labyrinth or Electric Labyrinth, which leads to Twilight 2000. Twilight 2000 leads into the Mutant Year Zero storyline. Mutant Zero eventually leads us to Coriolis, just like Blade Runner leads to Aliens, if you believe that the Blade Runner and Aliens takes place in the same universe, which some people do. Anyways, yeah, so I'm sure there's stuff I missed, but really, I'm not talking... Why I love this game is not the mechanics. So the mechanics are great and easy. Once you can figure them out, just roll lots of D6s. The archetypes, some people don't like, but some people do. The need to have multiple D6s of different colors, that's kind of And of course, the cards. Like I said, a lot of the system, you play like a card. Like there's plot cards and combat cards and initiative cards, and that's just a thing. I never really liked that idea. I can see why they did it. Because it's something tangible in your hand. It's like the tangible bennies from Deadlands. And if you're a tactile, tangible learner, then yeah. But for especially Tales from the Loop, the cards just sort of feel unnecessary. The cards definitely feel necessary, and you use them in Aliens and Twilight 2000, and but I can definitely see why people don't like it. It's expensive, it's hard to find, but oh my god, the art just steals your breath, is the best way to say it. And that's what I love about it. It's not the system, it's the imagery and the emotion that Tales from the Loop gestates. And it's definitely one of those things, like all art, you either get it or you don't. And if you're, I just fell into it like falling into a swimming pool. And it was eye-opening. It was breathtaking. It was beautiful. It filled me with longing and a nostalgic memory of the 80s childhood I didn't actually have, but should have had. And of course, as I said, beautiful melancholy. Anyways, that's my loving review of Tales from the Loop. If you appreciate my review, head on down to your friendly local game store, that's S Games Anime here in Ventura, and see if they can get you a copy. Like I said, it's difficult. If you don't appreciate my content, oh well, perhaps the poetry of the OGGM is not for you. That's completely understandable. I understand that there are a lot of people who are not going to get my love for this game, and that's cool. If you haven't hit subscribe yet, please subscribe. Help me hit 1,000 subs and I'll do something crazy. Till next time, I have been your guide to all the tabletop role-playing game news, weather, sports, and general internet nonsense. Wishing you a enjoyable afternoon. Now get out of my loop!